In this video, we are going to look at how to create a ruffle like this, or an extended gathered panel on the bottom of our A-line skirt. So in previous videos, we've created the A-line skirt out of our block. We've also shortened it by 20 centimeters, and so we've finished up with this pattern. Now I'm going to use this pattern to create a ruffle that will fit along the bottom edge of that hem. So the first thing we need to do is to measure the bottom edge, make sure we have the measurements that we'll be attaching it to, and then we can decide the length of the ruffle that we'll be creating. So using the tape measure, measuring, and I'm measuring the stitching line, not the actual cut edge, using the tape measure, and that's coming to 33 centimeters along there. So I'm marking that on, and I know that it's symmetrical, so it'll be 33 on that side as well. And now having a look at the back of the skirt, that's also 33 centimeters. Now, if you were creating this design either for yourself or somebody else, you'd be looking at the reference picture, or you might be looking at the garment on yourself to decide how much length you'd like to add. So I will often use a tape measure just to have a look at what I think I'll be adding. I think for this one, if I'm having a look at the design and extending that down, I think we need to add about 20 centimeters in length for that ruffle. So I'm going to use that as 20 centimeters. Now the ruffle will be a straight edge rather than a curved peplum. So we start by ruling a nice straight line along a very long piece of paper like this. In this case, it would be good to have a big metre-long ruler handy. If you don't have a metre-long ruler, you just keep extending the line using your grading ruler. Just make sure that I've got enough room. Yep. Drop it down a little bit. So the amount of gathering that you need in your gathered panel will depend on the thickness of the fabric that you've chosen and the amount of gather that you want visually. So as a start, we can start with say twice as much. So the length of the gathered frill will be twice as long as the seam that you're connecting it to on the hem of the skirt. So we have 66 on the front and 66 on the back, which brings us to 132, that'll do, 132, and 132 on here, so we're going to cut one pair. Now I wouldn't make a continuous ruffle of 2 meters 60 because you're not going to get fabric that's wide enough to do that. Depending on the amount of gather that you want and the length of the hem that you're attaching it to will determine whether or not you can use cross grain or straight grain when you're cutting it. It also might mean that if you have a lot of fullness, you've got a couple of seams in your gathered panel that you might not otherwise have. So for this design, I think we can get away with 2 pieces, the front and the back, and they'll be gathered down to the hem. So I'm measuring now 20 centimeters. Okay. Starting at this end, I've ruled a right angle up here and rule my line all the way across. So this over here will be our side seam. I'm going to rule in 12 mils. The side seam that we use on the ruffle will match the side seam that we have on the skirt. And now from here from the side seam to the centre front or the centre back, if we're doubling the volume of the ruffle in relationship to the hem, that means we're going to mark it at 66 centimetres. So I'll use the tape measure. .66. This will be the centre back or the centre front. And then 66 to the other end. Okay, now I can finish it with the seam allowance. 12 mil on the side seam, 12 mil on the hem that joins that stitches to the seam on the skirt. Okay, and we'll need to transfer this notch. And then this hem along here, along the edge of your ruffle, will depend again how heavy the fabric is. It's a straight edge, so you can have a slightly larger hem if you would like. But if you have a larger hem, that might affect how the fabric drapes. So I will guess we'll go for a 12 mils, and that would be a 6 mil rolled hem. Now I'll cut it out quickly before we finish the notching and the labelling. Alrighty, now we're ready to finish the labelling. This measures just over 130 centimetres. What that means is if the roll of fabric that you're cutting this from is over 140, you'll be able to fit this. So if you're using a 150 or 145, no problem, and you'll be able to have a grain line going straight. If your fabric is narrower, you might need to change the grain, and that can affect the drape. But we'll assume that your fabric is wide enough and pop a grain line in that runs straight. We need the notches for the hem, one for the side seam. This notch matches the centre front and the centre back of the skirt, and then another notch for along here and another notch for the hem. Now with the labelling, we need to indicate how much to gather this in. So once you will provide your sample machinist or maker with an illustration that will indicate how the skirt will be finished. You also need to tell them, so that they don't waste time trying to figure out how to fit this to the hem of the skirt, you need to tell them how much they're gathering in. So you do that by using a wavy line. So the wavy line starts where the gathering begins, continues all the way across to where the gathering finishes, and then some point along here we need to tell them exactly how much they're gathering to. So we will say the hem length is 66 centimetres on the front, so we will write gather to 66 centimetres. The name of this pattern piece, the labelling will include your name, the garment, which is the ruffle skirt. This is the ruffle. And this will be cut one pair self. So one for the front and one for the back, size 10. And I don't know the overall numbers of this pattern piece, but let's say this is 3 of 3. And there you have it.